First theoretical approach is called the desensitization theory. The main idea behind the desensitization theory is that with repeated exposure to violence, the negative emotional and physiological responses most humans have toward blood, violence, and gore habituates. Without the negative emotional response tendency, the individual becomes desensitized, and instrumental aggression becomes that much easier to perform. So basically, the more you are exposed to violence on TV, violence in music, violence in video games, etc., 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 the easier it is to perform those things yourself, simply because that normal human tendency we all have, to the shock of what this is, and that is taboo, that is off limits, kind of deteriorates and disintegrates. And so it becomes that much easier for us to do it ourselves, simply because it no longer holds the same, it no longer holds the same shock value or taboo that it once did. Again, the first time that we do anything is going to be the hardest. And that's pretty much what this is talking about. The more you are exposed to it with repeated exposure over and over and over and over again, the less intense it seems, and the more accepting we are of that, not only in other people but also in ourselves. So desensitization theory says that the more you are exposed to violence, either in person or even vicariously through the movies you watch, the music you listen to, the video games you play, etc., 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 then the easier it is for you to perform that yourself, simply because it's no longer such a big thing. And then we have catharsis theory. Catharsis theory suggests that viewing violence and aggression on TV and movies or in video games should actually decrease the likelihood of an individual behaving aggressively, because he or she essentially gets it out of their system. So this kind of harkens back to the Freud's instincts, that we all have this dark side of us, and it's much easier to kill people in Grand Theft Auto than it is to kill people in real life. And outside of the influence of the ability to kind of purge that out of our systems, then that will continue to build up to toxic levels, and we will snap and break, and chaos will reign. So being exposed to that and being able to express that in a a violent video game or whatever is actually healthy or beneficial. Support for catharsis theory is practically non-existent. There's no scientific data to back up the fact that exposure to violent video games or violent content is beneficial or therapeutic. In fact, the great majority of the evidence is in the opposite direction, towards desensitization, where the more we are exposed to it, the easier it is to do it ourselves. And modeling comes into play, where we are shown effective ways to you watch enough movies about bank robberies, and eventually you're going to construct a plan that is very, very a very good plan, simply because you've watched what happened, and you've watched what doesn't work, and you've watched what might be successful, and you've worked out all the possibilities. And so you think about maybe this is something that I could do myself, or the list goes on and on and on. So catharsis theory is not viable. The way over preponderance of evidence is thrust into desensitization, that the more you do it, the easier it is to become, or the easier it is for you to do it yourself. Violent video games, again, this is just another way for that to be expressed, another source of information, another source of exposure. Shootings at Columbine, you guys can look up all of that on your own. TV again is a very, very profound medium. We are becoming, as a society, we are becoming more and more and more desensitized to violence. And one theoretical approach is that this desensitization theory, that our media content is becoming much more in line with our true nature, according to Freud. And that is why it takes more and more and more to shock us. It takes more and more and more to get the same reaction, much like a drug addict has to take more and more and more of the drug to get the same effect. If you go back and you watch a horror movie from the 1950s or 60s or 80s or 90s, they are all pretty ridiculous and almost comical, with very few exceptions. It takes a lot more to get the same effect. It takes a lot more to shock us. And as a society, we're collectively becoming much more violent and especially much more accepting of violence. It's pervasive in our culture, and the more we are exposed to it, the more we see it as being okay, and it's not. But again, in order to gain viewers or whatever like that, things have to become increasingly more and more and more involved, and to get that same shock and awe value and same shock and awe reaction that is so important to getting eyeballs on your content. There's a graph there you can look at. Watching TV violence as a child correlates with later aggressive behavior for both men and women, but only with indirect aggression for women. Again, this is a correlation. It doesn't mean that if you watched violent content at the age of 8 or 10 that you will turn into a serial killer. There's no causal force there, but there is a correlation. So if you are a killer at the age of 30, and it's much more likely that you watched violent content when you were 8. Men who watch more violence on TV as children were more likely to have exhibited physical violence toward their spouses and were subsequently convicted of crimes at a rate over 3 times that of other men. Women who were frequent watchers of violence on TV were also more likely to behave aggressively or have committed some type of criminal act. So again, it translates from men to women. It affects both men and women equally. The findings of Huseman et al. Demonstrate clearly that the childhood exposure to media violence is related to adult aggression. Again, it's very important that you understand that there is no causal force here. Watching violent content on TV or listening to gangster rap or Marilyn Manson is not a guaranteed sure thing that you're going to turn into a violent, horrible person. But again, all things being equal, people who turn out to be more violent have, as more likely than not, some kind of exposure to that in their past. So if it is related, does an aggressive temperament stimulate a desire to view violent content, or does viewing violent content stimulate an aggressive temperament? Basically, which way does the causal arrow go? If I am a violent person inherently, am I going to naturally get more enjoyment and seek out more violent content? Is that just going to be my preference for entertainment choice? Or is watching that just randomly, whatever, is that going to build up and make me more violent in and of itself? Again, this is kind of a chicken egg type problem. We don't know. That's a problem with inferring causation from correlational types of data. And a lot of times the media and things like that will report correlations and want you to infer some type of causal inference there when you cannot do that. So again, we don't know which way the causal arrow is going to point. Which came first, an aggressive temperament to view violent content, or viewing violent content producing an aggressive temperament? Your guess is as good as mine. It's a correlation. That's kind of the point. They are related. The more you have of one, the more you're going to have of the other. But we don't know. There's too many other things in the equation. There's too much other. It's called variance. Too many other outside influences that can play a part. Because everybody who watches violent content on TV obviously does not turn into the next Ted Bundy or whatever. And not everyone who behaves aggressively watches violent content. A lot of them go to church every Sunday and whatever. So there is a correlation, but it's not. There is no causal link whatsoever. These findings suggest that the directionality of the effect is that viewing violent content on TV leads to later aggression, more than just possessing an aggressive personality lead to the desire to view violent content on TV. So this goes back to desensitization theory. Again, the vast preponderance of evidence is going to fall within the desensitization camp as opposed to the catharsis camp. On January 24th, 2008, Pope Benedict XVI praised the media for its role in spreading democracy and knowledge around the world, but also said that it overuses violence and vulgarity. Moreover, in order to attract listeners and increase the size of audiences, it does not hesitate at times to use vulgarity and violence and to overstep what he considered to be the mark. He suggested the need for an infoethics field in the media, just as there is for many other disciplines. So what can we do? It's becoming a big problem in our society. Our society is on the verge of breaking. We cannot control ourselves, and for all intents and purposes, it's getting worse. There's no end in sight. People are behaving much more selfishly, and people are behaving much more aggressively towards each other. We all have pent up, frustrations and pent up desires to act out. We're not allowed to, express our true natures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're all just kind of walking pressure cookers and time bombs, just waiting for the next opportunity to explode. What's the solution? If you can figure it out, there's probably a Nobel Prize for you, because it's becoming a big problem. School shootings are going through the roof. It's just shootings in general, and just people breaking and snapping and behaving in the ways that they might not have behaved otherwise. Terrorism is going up. It's just we are at a point in our society where things are starting to come to a head, and people are getting frustrated, and people are getting pissed off, and tensions are boiling over, and we're on the precipice and the cusp of something very, very profound happening, and it's probably going to happen sooner than later, but it will happen. Mark my words. We are on the verge of something big here. I don't see good things from our society coming down the pike. We are spinning towards catastrophe and disaster, from where I'm sitting in my perspective. Maybe you see the same thing. Maybe you don't. But a lot of these things are starting to really kind of come to a head. So yeah, keep an eye on that, and see where you think we are as a general society. Not you personally, but as a collective. Do you think we, as a human race, do you think we're better off today than we were 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 10 years ago? Are we, as a collective society and group, getting better, or do you think we're getting worse? Are we nicer to each other now than we were before? What's going on? What's happening with our society, with human nature? Is this part of who we are now as a collective group, as a collective society? I don't know. I hope not. But from everything that I've seen, and what's going on in the world, and all the news coverage of what's going on, it's not looking good. So I hope that things change, and I hope they change very, very soon, because otherwise it's not going to be a very good thing for us. But there are times when people do good things. There are times when people reach out and take care of each other, and there are times when people do behave selflessly. We're not all anarchist, chaos, whatever. But people are still inherently good, I think. But it's becoming much more difficult to do that in the way that our society is structured. And again, the more frustrations we build up, you do good and you never see the benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why I follow all the rules, but I never get anything from it. Matter of fact, it would be so much better for me if I didn't do what I was supposed to do. The good path is always the hardest path. That can get very, very exhausting. So we can't lose that. Otherwise, we are doomed. So, but you know, that's kind of more along the lines of antisocial behavior. And hang on just a second.